Hi guys, Luton here, welcome back for another episode of Below the Line. This is a series I put out every Tuesday and Thursday. It's where we discuss stories in the games industry, or we think about stuff to do with games. You guys respond in the comments to whatever topic I'm discussing, and in the next video I respond to your comments, and then we pose another topic and the cycle continues. So last time we were talking about Activision, we were talking about Activision's matchmaking patent to monetization. So basically this is where Activision were potentially going to be monetizing or attempting to monetize the ability to matchmake and just generally match players with different content in order to be able to essentially monetize that through microtransactions. And the microtransaction element has been something we've been discussing a lot lately in a load of different ways, and it doesn't stop today. In fact, I actually was looking around for other things that I could discuss and talk about, and actually I'm just going to take this opportunity to say, guys, if you find a news story or if you happen to think of a topic that is worthy for discussion in Below the Line, you can do one of two things. You can either also put that into the comments and say like, hey LT, this is something that you should look to discuss, or feel free to tweet at me. My Twitter is just @Luton09, so feel free to just tweet at me, link me something that is, you know, a topic or a story from an article, and then if it's something that I think is worth a topic, then yeah, I'll include it in the next Below the Line. Beyond that, the topic's going to be just stuff that's trending or things that I'm generally thinking about. So first up on that topic, Rob Enter comes in back again. Activision patent pretty messed up. I couldn't believe it when I first read about it. I know that's one of the things, it does just seem so insane. You can't believe that they would sort of, you know, this is the thing, whenever I discuss these things, somebody signed off on this. This is the bit that always gets me. Somebody has sat in a meeting somewhere and gone, yep, let's do that. You know, it comes off as very predatory. The game engine is trying to manipulate you by fixing matches, and if it works, it tries even harder to fix more matches to get you to spend even more. The calculating nature of this is what makes it so off-putting. Yeah, like I just said, congrats Activision, you have literally patented an algorithm for greed, disingenuousness, and depravity. That's pretty bloody full on. But it's true, and I think a lot of people were, you know, a lot of people were like, yeah, you know, this is not anything that's in and of itself that unusual, but that of itself is what is so incredibly depressing. It's like, this isn't unusual, and it should be. It should be so unusual that people would literally freak out about it, but they, you know, happily they were freaking out about it. Okay, next up, Johan, who says, regarding the matchmaking patent, the described system is nothing new, can already be seen in other games, even including Arma 3, although he says it's more of a side effect than a hard-coded matchmaking system. I'm curious how that works, but he says, for example, I don't have the Jet DLC yet, but can still play on servers, oh okay, I see where this is going, where the jets are available. The moment I see those jets, I could think, hey, those are great, I also want to fly them. And it's not quite the same though, is it, dude? It's not really quite the same. Try to get in, receive a pop-up asking me to buy the DLC, which after a while, I will, because I really want to fly those planes. Yeah, but that's not really, that's not really the same as kind of like matching people with better players that will try and incentivize them, or loot boxes which will give you random stuff, is it? You know, the Arma system is basically like, hey, we're going to allow the content to be in the game so it doesn't split the community, and if you want that thing, you can purchase that thing. I mean, it couldn't be more straight up, so there's nothing deceptive about it. It's literally putting the stuff out there for you. Now, again, I'm sure some people might say, oh, LT, you're just being more okay with it because you are, like, you know, you're all about Arma. Well, it's like, you know, I can appreciate that, but I actually personally think that as in-game content and DLC content works, you know, I think it's a better way of doing it. Also, can we please try to remember that Arma is a game which has been out for 4 years now. Arma is not a yearly cycle, and most of these games that we are discussing are yearly cycles. So as you will see when we get, well actually, you know, I'm going to put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that later at the end of this video, because it actually ties in perfectly with the topic that I'm raising for you guys today. So you'll see where we go with that at the end of this video. Okay, it goes on to say the same already existed with the Arma 2 AA, where I could play on the servers with blah blah blah, and then only saw the low quality versions instead of the high quality assets when I would own those DLCs. Most games already have systems in place to persuade, force people to buy DLCs. That's not really true though, is it? Because forcing you to buy it would literally be, again, forcing you to buy it, which they are not. People to buy DLCs or spend money on in-game items to be able to have the full experience. Again, full experience, it's actually good that that's in quotes, because it's completely subjective what a full experience is. You know, full experience is whatever the dev decides to ship. Right? That's your full experience. Whether you like it or not, whatever the dev decides, that's the full experience. What you decide is not the full experience. Like, you know, and again, that is totally subjective and arguable. I completely, you know, I take that point. But at the end of the day, when you think about it literally, it is just whatever the dev decides. They're making the game. Whatever they decide is full is, you know, basically their side of things. Now, we can argue the merits of like little bits of elements in and out of games, but at the end of the day, it's literally what they want. He says, yes, I really dislike the patent, although it's more due to the fact that it's a patent than implementation. I don't care that I play with or against people who use their father's credit card to buy OP items and still suck at the game. Again, that will become relevant when I talk about this later on. I care about the fact that Activision now charge money from other developers who like to persuade non-payers into payers through matchmaking. There's some interesting stuff there. The biggest one being that you think it's okay for people to buy stuff because it doesn't maybe affect you, or you don't feel that it affects you, and you say, you know, it's okay for people to buy stuff with their father's credit card to buy OP items and then still suck at the game. Again, I will discuss this towards the end of the video, but essentially that is a flawed concept, because it's very similar to the people that were talking about the EA loot crates and going, hey, I don't think it's going to affect me, so I don't care. You should care, because if you don't care, then the devs, or not the devs, the producers will go, hey, this works, now let's see how much further we can push it. So every time you just check it, it can get worse and get worse until it does affect you. So what you should be doing is putting yourself in the place of other people. It also shows a general sort of, you know, disregard for other people, because you're saying, I don't give a shit about those other players, I don't care what they get up to, I only concern with my experience. And again, that's not a particularly great standpoint to be on, because it's saying like, hey, I don't care what happens to it. It's about like, you know, you only care about something until it affects you, and that's actually very kind of representative, I think, of the world that we live in now, where people, and actually I don't think it's representative of the world we live in, I think it's representative of humans in general, that people often do not like to acknowledge things are an issue until they literally bite them, you know. And it's like, that's a generally flawed way of existing, because having no foresight and looking ahead and going like, hey, if I don't fix this right now, it's gonna become a problem for me. I mean, how many things could you apply that to? Many things. And it's like, so dealing with things just on the day-to-day basis of, does it physically affect me right now, right with what I'm doing right now, is generally, in my opinion, a very kind of flawed attitude towards life, but that is just my opinion. Okay, next up we've got Whiskey Tango Foxtrot again, who says, the Activision patent debacle is just another symptom of publishers looking for new ways to squeeze blood out of a stone. Currently the trend for publishers to make a game's service where they can sell content to players piecemeal. In theory, the goal is to make the game more profitable over a longer period of time, rather than investing huge amounts of cash for yearly refreshers of their larger IPs. That is 100% accurate. This in part due to consumers having put their foot down against the past trend. We all saw that in the sales of their last two COD games, Assassin's Creed and Battlefield, etc., they slowly were trending downward in overly yearly sales because of the brand fatigue. It's becoming more likely that smaller niche games are going to be the hot ticket. I mean, yeah, look at stuff like Senua's Sacrifice, okay, a AAA looking game that was actually an indie game and did ridiculously well, rather than the AAA experience, as more players are looking for actual innovative, fun and rewarding gameplay like Senua's Sacrifice, something indie devs have mostly been providing. Look at Armour, Squad, PUBG, Hell Let Loose, the list goes on and on. It makes one wonder, should we really care if the AAA market is crap, when there are so many better alternatives out there to spend our time and money with? Now, that is an interesting point. I'd be particularly interested actually to have you guys answer that along with other stuff that we're talking about today, and I might even phrase that as another question on a different day. Of course, to some extent we should care, because the egregious business models they stuff these games with is a cancerous trend that hurts the industry as a whole, but sooner or later the well will dry up for them. We just need to put our foot down and say no. I think in general, points well made there, but again, this comes back to a sort of wider discussion about, you know, literally, is that enough? Will that be enough of people putting their foot down and saying no? What can people generally do? And again, I'll sort of address that a little bit later on. But now, in response to me discussing about loot crates and calling out how things were going to get progressively worse, Stinker actually comes in and says, no, you were not overreacting. I recall you predicting this kind of BS would happen years ago, and nothing will change. It's just going to get worse because players are ignorant and naive. That's a bit harsh, bit of a generalization there. And publishers are exploiting this because they know how to control the masses. The consumers are just their personal herd of sheep, and they pretty much can do whatever the fuck they want with it. To an extent, I think that's true, obviously. With DLCs and season passes, people used to cry but then they would just still buy it. And he says, I'm guilty of that as well. And now it's become the norm, and we're simply on the next step. And this is what I keep saying, it's always about that next step. By enabling them to do stuff, you are basically reinforcing them thinking, oh, we got away with this, now where can we take it? And just look at Activision, that's where you're coming from. Microtransactions, pay to win in AAA games, people are going to continue to cry, but they'll still buy it anyway, because, sorry for harsh wording, they are simple-minded, naive, and hypocrites. Again, like, it's a bit of a sweeping generalization, but, you know, it's not completely in and of itself untrue. This is not only the case with gaming. It is literally everywhere. Politics, religion, just look at history. Again, you know, it's fair. The mass of people let themselves being controlled. It's a flaw in human nature. That's an interesting point to make. And that is exactly what the gaming industry is exploiting, not only recently. They're most likely already planning for the next step in this evolution of milking the consumer. It just makes me sad when something like Battlefront 2 happens, and then after the outrage, you just get a statement that says it'll change, we're testing it, blah 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 blah, and people actually buy in on that. Sorry, but how naive can you be to think that they're listening to you? It is so obvious, and I think that's a statement that I've heard more and more and more, but you know, have we heard it enough? I don't think so, but the fact that we're just very much talking about it is a step in the right direction. Okay, next up, one of my guys, Jimbo. He says, hey LT, I think a lot of people in the comments have made some really good points, but I won't individually quote them, respond, or it would be like reading a small book. Instead, I'll try to address what you've said and read as a whole. Now, he did have a couple of other big segments that he talked about, but I can't cover all of it, so I've selected like the last main point. So he says, on to the final point. A recent trend in AAA games over the last 10 years is the dumbing down of gameplay. As games have become more and more popular and playing games has become more and more accepted in culture, they have to appeal to a wider audience. I still remember being called a nerd because I played games on my computer when I was in school and even after. If I was born 15 years later, it would have been perfectly normal. The problem is, with more and more people playing games, is they have to be easier and easier to get into and have to be appealing from the get-go, or they won't see as many sales. There are the older breed of gamers, usually age 25 plus, that's me. Then there is the new breed of gamers of younger ages. Unfortunately, the old breed is vastly outnumbered by the new, and with social media, everyone has an opinion they can share. In the good old days of gaming, people made a game in the hopes that people would enjoy it. They would be patches onto it to fix the game in any areas that were then broken. But now, with early access, alphas and betas, people are giving their input on the game, and as a result, they bend the game to fit the masses of what they want the game to be and not what they originally had in mind. He's talking about the devs, and this will then continue after release. If the player base hadn't been able to give that feedback in the numbers that they have, I'm pretty sure there would have been a lot less of the dumbing down of games, but they want to sell the game to as many people as they can. Now, I talked about this. Remember how I talked about at the start of Battlefield 1, how they tried to make a change to Conquest, and then everyone was like, oh, I don't like it, and so they were forced to go back to Conquest, which in my opinion was a mistake. And it's like, sometimes, you know, it's always like, you know, the thing that I always come back to, like the Simpsons quote, democracy doesn't work. It's kind of like that. It's like sometimes, you know, just having the mass opinion is not always the right answer. Now, again, you can debate that. You can discuss, well, hey, if enough people want X thing to be in a game, then fair enough. But again, if everybody knew how to make a game, then everybody would just be doing it. But it's not. You have people that understand and have more experience in some of these elements, and it's, you know, those people will often know, well, hey, look, I have tried what you have suggested many times over, and I know that it doesn't work. So sometimes people just physically don't have the experience to know that what they're suggesting probably won't work. In the same way that with my armor stuff, I often have people suggesting me things over and over and over and over again, and it's like, look, dude, I tried this like a year ago. I know it doesn't work. You know, so you have to kind of keep that in mind when it comes to lots of people giving feedback and suggestion. More feedback and suggestion doesn't automatically equate to a game being better. He goes on to say, now where you see a real difference in gameplay and the DLC microtransactions is the independent developers and small publishers. Again, we talk about this. They don't hype their games up months and months beforehand. They don't get loads of people on alphas and betas and get way too much feedback. They stick to their original ideas. They make their games the traditional way, and then you end up with games like Verdun. People used to make games for certain player bases, Call of Duty games for the fast, up-close players, 1942 Battlefield 2 for the slower, more tactical, team-based but still arcade games, so on. And now the AAA games try to mix all these elements together, and the games suffer as a result. I'm hoping as more and more of these gems come out, the bigger guys will take notice and learn something from them. Okay, next up we have Chief, who says, I don't post my thoughts ever because I assume nobody wants to hear what I have to say. and that's why you're here right now. Let me clarify what I mean by that. The trend towards giant toxic gaming communities and microtransaction premium benefits splitting the community leaves me feeling frustrated and unsatisfied with the experiences of playing. Oftentimes I agree with you fully, this trend is utter bullshit, but I'm just one guy and by myself I can't change this, so I hold my tongue despite the bitter taste it leaves. A community of like-minded gamers who come together not only to play but can also make our collective voices heard, that enough is enough and we're tired of this bullshit, is a good solution. And he kind of says, I think I would love to become that. Essentially, you know, I have been saying this for a long time on my channel, you know, and it's like, I actually think that through my channel, the more you guys interact and build this channel, the more we will have a voice in that sphere, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this series back. So the more you guys get interactive with this series, the more you guys share this series, the more you say, hey guys, check out this video or whatever that Lutin is making, you know, get your involved, get your opinion in there, the more we can generate opinion, the more we can get kind of people interacting and get people aware and just discussing this. I think just discussing this stuff is good enough, because I think most people, once they become aware of these things, are smart enough to understand, like, hey, I can see that this is bullshit. So it's like, the more we generate discussion, the more people get involved, and then hopefully the conversation will drive itself, and that in and of itself should hopefully start to make some headway in resolving these kind of issues. And let's be real, I am by far and away not the only person. That's the thing to remember. This is part of an overall trend where you see people discussing these kind of topics. You have guys like Jim Sterling who produce fantastic content, just completely unadulterated, no BS stuff, where he's really just like lifting the rock up and looking what's underneath. Okay, next up, got David, TGDX. He says, great video as usual. Microtransactions, pre-order content, multiplayer, season passes, pre-order, extra content, loot crates are ruining gaming for me. I think I'm at the end of my tether with it all. I think actually some people really are feeling like that. Like, they don't know where to turn. Games these days are already expensive, £60 for an incomplete game, and the only way to make it complete is to then spend money on a season pass. Like I say, I think that's still subjective, but I get what you're saying. Then you pay money on content you can't unlock in the game as standard. Now that is, again, that's something that is, in my opinion, total BS. Whether or not it's included as a DLC or whatever, but you should be able to kind of unlock stuff without microtransactions just by in-game currency, or, you know, like experience currency is what I mean. He says, my kid brother got caught up in the EA loot systems playing FIFA. Spent 3 months over £1,600 on gold packs. He got himself in serious debt off the back of it. And he says, yeah, this might be his choice, but there's no guidance on things like this. It is gambling, and these sick money-grabbing companies need to stop this crap now. I'm all in favour of hashtag boycott EA, so let's see where that goes. Okay, Rob is back again. Thanks for the feedback on the last comment, LT. It was bit of a long one. Good that you took some of the more important parts out of it. The future of gaming, as the CEO of EA described in June this year. We put out fewer games, but they played far more hours and over many more platforms by 10 times the number of people than when I started 18 years ago. There's good reason for that. What has become apparent to us is that human beings have fundamental needs. Once you get past air, food, water and shelter, the necessities of life, this really does read like something from a CEO, doesn't it? Then it's about sense of belonging. Social. Oh, I remember calling this out and saying what a total load of BS it was. Sense of belonging, social interaction, self-esteem, overcoming challenge, and building self-worth. Self-actualization, yes. And the creative element, leaving some kind of legacy. Self-actualization. As individual games fulfill these needs more and more, audiences stay loyal to a single game and keep pulling new experiences from it. Basically, says Rob, from AAA games we can expect less new titles. The games that are being released will have multiplayer or co-op as the core part of the game. See, this is what I say when I say read between the lines. So that consumers have to stay attached to a game. Games are really becoming a service. That's true. It fulfills a need of social engagement, and systems to monetize these longer playtimes will be in place to pay for the service. I think the more hardcore or niche gamers in the gaming community will find that the AAA industry is becoming an unattractive market for them. I think that already has happened. AAA games are not going to be there to be super challenging, but to be challenging and then patting consumers on the back to fulfill the service. I think, you know, there's a lot to be said all in there. I mean, the CEO, yeah, it's business talk. We know how that goes. But, you know, yeah, I think more and more hardcore gamers are... But I tell you what, it's not just hardcore gamers, because you do see some of these DLC, these season passes, are not doing so well. So that does kind of give you the sense that other people beyond just the hardcore core gamer base, they are waking up a little bit, you know, because, for example, like, why did they drop season passes from, you know, Battlefront? Now, it could be, if you're really cynical, that they decided, hey, season passes sell well, but here's an even better way for us to make more money. But arguably, you could say that people are sort of wising up to it a little bit, and people wised up to season passes. This is a new thing that they're not wise to, and so people haven't gone so hard in on it, He says, I think we see already some signs of development. The indie game market is growing. Basically, the niche hardcore gamers are moving to indie market, and we've heard this from other people today, because the AAA market doesn't cover their category of games, or gameplay gets too much influenced by wider target groups that can't bind themselves in the context of the game. Indie games seem to find better ways to create new game mechanics to challenge hardcore players and come with concepts that are bound with the right story, lore and context, putting gameplay pretty much over anything else. Games like PUBG, My Summer Car, Cuphead show that there is a huge market that is untapped by AAA games. It's very true. Hell, even games like Euro Truck Simulator and Wargame have a pretty big place in the indie self-publishing marketplace, and there is something to be said about self-publishing when you look at stuff like Frontier and what they're doing right now. He says, I'm personally more excited to see that things that suddenly pop up in the indie market than to look at the predictable games that are being released in AAA market. Now, isn't that interesting that he says that, when we have heard that again from other people today that have said exactly the same thing? Players that are hardcore gamers and say they are much more excited about seeing what comes up in indie games than they are in these big AAA games. And I think that is something that should be taken note of. And I would be very interested to hear what you guys have to say, whether you feel similar to that right now. Right, really quick one from Struss Veron. Luton, I think the issue on the community thing for you is that most people prefer to follow along instead of going the extra mile to lead or be proactive. And again, I think that's just a true statement. I don't have a lot to really say on that, but I think it speaks to like what a lot of people are aware of. It's like I say, people just don't want to go out of their way to have to kind of discuss or fight. It's just because gameplay is supposed to be a fun, relaxing thing that you kick back with. It shouldn't be this horrible stress where you have to worry about money and all these other kind of things. It should be something that is very enjoyable. But again, arguably some people do say that they find the games enjoyable even with this horrible, sort of monetization thing thrown in the mix. But, I guess it takes all kinds, doesn't it? Right, lastly, Wedge. He says, it's really sad when after paying a full price for a game, we can't enjoy it because of microtransactions and loot box bullshit. That's a good point to make about, you think you know what you're getting, but then you feel pressured or frustrated because there's stuff you want that you can't actually get. People are defending Battlefront's system because EA gives us free DLCs. Really? The whole reason for these free DLCs are not to make the community happy, but to avoid to lose that majority of player base after 2 months, which is very true. Medal of Honor Warfighter, Titanfall, Battlefield Hardline, Star Wars Battlefront, they died before even the first map pack was released, and the poor players who bought the premium season pass were screwed. And who said that? Me. I called it out for ages, and I was probably one of the only people calling it out, saying that's why season passes are BS and that the season passes shouldn't exist. It is a fundamentally flawed concept for you as a consumer, and I have been saying this for years now. Yeah, so the player who bought the premium season pass was screwed. He left the game as well. It was a domino effect. He says, I turned my back on AAA multiplayer games a while ago, time to time enjoying more single player games, but it looks like the publishers find a way to ruin that experience as well. What is my opinion about Visceral Games being shut down and EA's response to why they iced, or I guess sugar-coated their linear story focused Star Wars game? Well, actually, I think more interesting to literally answer that question is to look at a story which I saw yesterday. Okay, so I'm going to go from wedges and I'm going to go straight into discussing the topic for you guys to answer to in the comments down below today. So this week's discussion topic is yet again EA. Now, PC Gamer reports from an ex-Bioware dev that EA are currently pushing more open world games because they're easier to monetize. Now look, I know I've been a bit of an EA train lately, but look, I can't help what stories and talking points are coming up, right? If there's other stuff going on, point me to it, I'll discuss it, but this is just what's going on right now. Like I said, I did look for other stories of interest, but I thought this was just the most relevant. Now I will say, I am also sure that this is not isolated to EA, okay? So let's keep that in mind as a wider point of discussion, right? It's not just them. But this is just more evidence of what I've been saying, not just this month, but for the past few years. It's also why I've been saying we should not only make more of a stand to this kind of thing, but also YouTubers and journalists who continue to make ignorant, dismissive statements about these practices. They should be more accountable for pushing a clearly wrong narrative. Now, this ex-Bioware dev, his name's Mana Air, was quoted as saying that he has seen people literally spend $15,000 on Mass Effect multiplayer cards. And this goes back to what I was saying recently about referencing that South Park Micropay episode where they talk about games which include microtransactions exploiting the heaviest users. In the same way that stuff like drugs or alcohol do, it's all about exploiting the addicts. It's also why I restate that anybody who tries to dismiss in-game loot crates or transactions as not mattering, as they don't personally affect me are either ethically bankrupt or are just massively uninformed. Man Air continues by saying that it's definitely a thing inside of EA. They are generally pushing for more open world games. He says that the reason is you can monetize them better. The words in there that they were using were have them come back again and again. Why do you care about that at EA? The reason you care about that is because microtransactions. Buying card packs in Mass Effect games, the multiplayer, it's the same reason we added card packs to Mass Effect 3. How do you get people to keep coming back to a thing instead of just playing for 60 to 100 hours? He goes on to say, the problem is that we've scaled up our budgets to $100 million plus for making a game, and we haven't actually made a space for good linear single player games that are under that. But why can't we have both? Why does it have to be one or the other? And the reason is EA and those big publishers in general only care about the highest return on investment. They don't actually care about what the players want. They care about what the players will pay for. You need to understand the amount of money that's at play with microtransactions. Now, it's important to remember that this is just one developer who no longer works for Bioware or EA. Also, as I said, it's also important to remember that this is now an industry-wide issue at a AAA level. I think many people will continue to say, what can we possibly do about this? And honestly, very little. But I think that incidents like that loot crate panic over Star Wars Battlefront 2 are a sign that people are becoming more resistant, albeit in only a slight way. But how did more people than just those who are already aware of this kind of thing become aware of that loot crate nonsense? Well, through discussion videos, journalism and social media. So I hope that me reviving this series and running it weekly can help in the smallest way by just some of you guys maybe hearing about stories that you wouldn't have heard otherwise. Would you guys have been aware of this otherwise than me talking about it right now? To keep reminding people, hey, you should read between the lines as we saw in some of the comments today and help people just be more aware and think beyond just the glitz and the gloss that are AAA games. Now, a final quote from that ex-Bioware heir who says, that's the reason other EA products started getting multiplayer that hadn't really had them before, because we nailed it. We brought in a ton of money. It's repeatable income versus one-time income. And I'm just going to say that again. It's repeatable income versus one-time income. And that really is the core of what this is all about. Repeatable income versus one-time income. Publishers don't want to just make a good game anymore. They want to make a game that they can market as hard as possible for maximum sales and then rinse the users for as much cash as possible after the fact. It's so brazen and obvious that it is astonishing that people are not more outraged by it. And it sadly speaks more to how little people think about these problems. As always, guys, if you enjoyed this discussed today, please hit the like on this series. Below the Line is released on Tuesday and Thursday each week. I pick the best comments to answer on the next video, so tell me what you think about today's topic down in the comments below. Thanks, guys, and this is Luton.